I never thought a piece of chalk could make me afraid to sleep in my own home. But when symbols started appearing on my street last October, everything changed. Let me tell you why I now check my security cameras obsessively every Halloween season. I first noticed it on my way home from cross-country practice. The sun was setting earlier now, casting long shadows across our suburban neighborhood as I jogged up my street. A flash of white against the dark concrete caught my eye. A simple chalk drawing near the Johnsons' house 3 doors down. I almost dismissed it as kids' artwork, but something about it seemed off. It wasn't the usual hopscotch or cheerful doodles. Instead, it was a crude arrow with 3 dots above it, drawn with precise, deliberate strokes. The next day, another symbol appeared closer to my house, this time in front of the Murphy's place. It looked like a box with a wavy line through it. Again, the lines were too clean, too intentional to be random kids' drawings. I took a photo with my phone, something nagging at the back of my mind. My mom noticed me staring at the symbols while getting the mail. "Everything okay, Sophie?" she asked, keys jingling in her hand. "Yeah, just these weird chalk marks," I said, trying to sound casual. "They keep showing up on different houses." She glanced at them briefly. "Probably just kids getting excited for Halloween. Speaking of which, we need to buy candy this weekend." I wanted to believe her, but that night I couldn't help Googling chalk symbols on houses. What I found made my stomach drop. Multiple news articles popped up about burglars using chalk marks to tag potential targets. Some marked empty houses. Others indicated security systems, and some highlighted homes with valuable items spotted through windows. The next morning, another symbol appeared, this time just 2 houses away. A spiral with what looked like an X through it. My hands shook as I added it to my growing photo collection. I started noticing other things too. A dark car driving slowly past our house multiple times during the day, and footprints in the flower bed beneath our living room window. I showed the pictures to my best friend Megan at lunch. "You're being paranoid," she said, mouthful of pizza. "It's probably just coincidence. Or maybe it's for some Halloween scavenger hunt. Then why are they getting closer to my house? And why did they start right after I left my laptop visible through the window while studying?" She rolled her eyes. "You've been watching too many true crime shows." But I couldn't shake the feeling. That afternoon, I walked home with my younger brother Tommy instead of staying late for practice. I noticed security cameras on the houses that hadn't been marked. The ones with symbols? No visible cameras or security signs. I convinced my dad to install a Ring doorbell that weekend. He thought I was overreacting, but agreed it couldn't hurt. "Better safe than sorry," he said, testing the motion alerts. But don't go looking for trouble where there isn't any. The marks continued appearing, 1 house closer each day. By October 30th, there was only 1 house left between us and the latest symbol. I barely slept that night, jumping at every sound. The Ring camera kept alerting to motion, but each time it was just leaves blowing across our porch. Halloween morning, I nearly threw up when I opened our front door. There was a large chalk symbol right on our front walkway, different from the others. This one looked like a circle with an arrow pointing directly at our door. My hands trembled as I took the photo and sent it to the neighborhood watch group I joined. Within an hour, Mrs. Peterson from 3 streets over responded. She'd seen the same progression of symbols in her neighborhood last year, right before 3 houses were robbed on Halloween night. The burglars had used the chaos of trick-or-treaters as cover, knowing which houses to hit based on their marks. I stayed home from school, watching our security camera feed like a hawk. Mom thought I was being ridiculous, but let me stay after I showed her Mrs. Peterson's message. Around noon, the same dark car I'd seen earlier that week drove by, moving slower than normal traffic. This time, I caught the license plate. When I called the non-emergency police line, the dispatcher took my concerns seriously. Apparently, similar symbols had been reported in nearby neighborhoods, all preceding break-ins. They increased patrols in our area and took down the license plate number. That evening, as trick-or-treaters began making their rounds, I noticed something odd on our security feed. 3 people in generic Halloween masks kept passing our house, but never came to the door for candy. They'd slow down, look at their phones, then move on. The 3rd time, one pointed to our side gate. I called the police again. This time, they responded immediately. As a patrol car turned onto our street, the masked figures quickly disappeared between houses. Later that night, we learned they caught 3 people several blocks away with lock-picking tools, empty duffel bags, and detailed maps of the neighborhood. In their car, they found chalk and a notebook listing houses with their security vulnerabilities. The officer told us we were lucky. In other neighborhoods, the burglars had successfully hit multiple houses while homeowners were distracted by trick-or-treaters. They used the chalk symbols to communicate which houses were easy targets. No security systems, predictable patterns of when people were home, and valuable items visible through windows. Now, every Halloween season, I obsessively check our security cameras and look for chalk marks. We added more cameras, motion sensor lights, and never leave valuables visible through windows. Some might call me paranoid, but I know better. Sometimes the scariest things aren't supernatural monsters or ghost stories. They're the very real predators who hide behind the chaos of Halloween, marking their targets one chalk symbol at a time. The thieves were caught, but I still can't shake the feeling of violation, knowing they'd been watching us, studying our patterns, and marking our house like prey. These days, I always tell people, if you see strange symbols appearing in your neighborhood, don't dismiss them as harmless Halloween fun. They might be marking more than just their territory. They could be counting down to their next target. Working at a haunted house seemed like the perfect October job until I realized one of our actors wasn't on the payroll. By then, it was almost too late. I'd been working at the Valley Scream haunted house attraction for 3 weekends when I first noticed something off about the actor in the butcher's costume. It was my job to monitor the security feeds and coordinate the timing between scares, making sure our paid actors didn't bunch up or leave dead zones. That night, watching the grainy footage of Room 6, something about his movements caught my attention. "Hey, Marcus," I called to our lead security guy, who's working the butcher scene tonight. He glanced at the schedule. "Dave's in there until 11, then Kelly takes over." I checked the timestamp. 9:45 p.m. "Dave's wearing the striped apron, right?" "Yeah." "Why?" I pointed to the monitor, showing a figure in a solid black apron. "Then who's that?" Marcus leaned in closer, frowning. "Must be one of the floaters covering a break. I'll check the roster," but he came back looking confused. "Everyone's accounted for. Maybe someone swapped costumes." I watched the figure more closely now. Unlike our regular actors who had designated scare spots and choreographed moves, this person seemed to be improvising. They'd drift between rooms, getting progressively closer to guests, especially those with bags or phones in their hands. Our strict no-touching policy meant actors had to maintain a 3-foot distance from visitors. This person kept breaking that rule, brushing against people in the narrow hallways, reaching toward pockets and purses. I radioed Dave in Room 6. "You seen another butcher in there with you?" Static crackled before his response. "Nah, just me and the usual jump scares." "Why?" My stomach tightened as I watched the black-aproned figure slip into Room 7. "No reason, just checking positions." That's when the complaints started coming in. First, a teenage girl reported her phone missing after going through Room 6. Then a college student couldn't find his wallet. By the end of the night, we had 5 reports of missing items. I spent my break reviewing security footage, trying to track the mystery actors' movements. They seemed to know exactly where our cameras' blind spots were, disappearing into shadows at crucial moments. More disturbing was how they'd target specific guests, ones who had their phones out taking videos or who pulled out cash at the ticket booth. The next night, I came in early to compare employee photos with my screenshots of the imposter. None matched. I showed the images to our veteran actors, but no one recognized them. The costume was even one of ours, similar, but slightly different in ways I hadn't noticed at first. We need to alert management, I told Marcus, but he was skeptical. Could be a new hire who got their paperwork mixed up, he suggested. Let's not cause panic over nothing. But it wasn't nothing. That night, the figure appeared again, this time wearing a different mask but the same black apron. They were getting bolder, staying longer in each room, getting closer to guests. I watched them reach for a woman's designer purse before another group walked in, causing them to retreat quickly into the shadows. I kept detailed notes of their patterns. They never entered through the main staff entrance, never took breaks in the employee area, never showed up in group photos or staff meetings. It was like they were a ghost, except ghosts don't steal phones and wallets. The breaking point came when a guest credit card was used at a gas station 10 minutes after they left our attraction. The card had been in their back pocket during the tour. Police were called. And suddenly management was very interested in my observations. We reviewed hours of footage, and a pattern emerged. The imposter would arrive around 9:30 each night, somehow slipping in through an emergency exit that was supposed to be alarmed. They knew our routines, our blind spots, even our radio codes. They must have worked here before, Marcus concluded, as we watched them smoothly navigate the maze-like backstage areas. Or they'd been studying us for weeks. The police set up a sting operation the following weekend. They sent in undercover officers with decoy phones and wallets, trying to catch the thief in the act. But it was like the imposter knew. They didn't show up that night or the next. Just when we thought they'd moved on, one of our actual actors, Kelly, came running into the security office. "Someone's in my usual spot," she panted. "They're wearing my backup costume, the one that went missing last week." I quickly pulled up the feeds. There they were. But something was different. Instead of working the rooms, they were standing perfectly still, staring directly into the camera. A chill ran down my spine as I realized they were wearing a mask of my face, a high-quality printout, probably made from the staff photos hanging in our break room. Security descended on room 6, but they were gone. The emergency exit door was swinging shut, its alarm disabled. In their place was a Polaroid photo showing all of us in the security office, taken through the window behind us. It was dated 3 weeks earlier, before I'd even noticed anything wrong. The police investigation revealed more than we expected. Similar incidents had occurred at other haunted attractions across 3 states. The thief would study a location for weeks, learn its patterns, then pose as staff to rob guests. They'd stolen thousands in phones, wallets, and credit cards before anyone realized what was happening. They never caught the person responsible. The following season, management installed new security systems, required ID badges, and implemented strict check-in procedures. But I still find myself studying our security feeds, watching for that black apron in the shadows. Every time I see an actor I don't immediately recognize, my heart races. Because in a place designed to scare people, the scariest thing isn't the monsters or the jump scares. It's knowing that someone could be hiding in plain sight, wearing a costume within a costume, turning our own security measures against us. I still work security at Valley Scream, but now I spend extra time verifying every actor's identity, checking every costume change, monitoring every emergency exit. Some call it paranoia. I call it learning from experience. Because when thousands of people come through wearing costumes, it's too easy for someone with bad intentions to blend in. So if you're planning to visit a haunted house this Halloween, keep your valuables close and pay attention to who's really scaring you. Sometimes the real threat isn't the person jumping out to make you scream. It's the quiet observer in the shadows, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The sound of knocking still makes my heart race. Last Halloween taught me why you should never let your children answer the door alone, even on a night when strangers are expected. I was in the kitchen with my husband, Dan, preparing our traditional Halloween chili, while our kids, Emma, 10, and Tyler, 8, bounced around the living room in their superhero costumes. The early trick-or-treaters had already started making their rounds, and we figured letting the kids handle candy duty would keep them occupied while we cooked. Remember the rules. I called out as another knock echoed through the house. Just open the door enough to hand out candy. Don't step outside, and come get us if anything seems weird. We know, Mom. Emma rolled her eyes, already clutching the candy bowl. She was at that age where everything her parents said was dramatically uncool. The first hour went smoothly. Through the kitchen archway, I could see glimpses of princesses, zombies, and the occasional parent standing at the bottom of our porch steps. The kids were having a blast playing host, and I was just about to add the final spices to the chili when I noticed something odd about the knocking. It had become more aggressive. Not the excited rapid fire of little kids, but heavy, deliberate thuds. 3 slow knocks. Pause. 3 more knocks. Who is it? I heard Emma ask through the door. A muffled voice responded, too low for me to make out the words. Tyler pulled the door open wider than usual, and I caught sight of what looked like an adult in a dark hoodie. No costume, no kids with them. Dan, I whispered, grabbing his arm. Something's not right. He wiped his hands and headed toward the door, but by then the person was gone. Kids, what did they say? They asked if Mom and Dad were home, Tyler said, dropping more candy into his own treat bag. They said they were checking which houses had parents around for some church thing. My blood ran cold. How many people like that have come by? Emma shrugged. Like 4 or 5 groups. They all asked kind of the same questions. Dan and I exchanged looks. He immediately went to check all our windows and back door while I pulled up our doorbell camera feed. What I saw made my hands shake. Over the past hour, at least 3 different groups of adults had come to our door. No costumes, no children, just hoodies and baseball caps pulled low. Each time, they'd asked our kids questions about who was home, peered past them into the house, and made notes on their phones. They were casing the house, Dan said, looking over my shoulder at the footage, using Halloween as cover to figure out which homes had kids answering the door alone. I felt sick remembering how many times we'd heard that heavy knocking and just assumed it was trick-or-treaters. How many details had our children innocently revealed to these strangers? Just then, another knock came, the same 3 slow thuds. Dan rushed to answer it this time, yanking the door open, but again, no one was there. Instead, we found a small mark drawn in chalk next to our welcome mat. Our neighbor across the street, Mrs. Chun, was on her porch and waved urgently for us to come over. Once we were within earshot, she spoke in a hushed voice. I've been watching those people come to your house, she said. They've been circling the block all evening. After each visit, they park around the corner and switch cars. I called the police about 20 minutes ago. As if on cue, a dark sedan drove past our house for the 3rd time in 5 minutes. This time I caught a clear view of the driver, the same hooded figure who'd been at our door earlier. Dan hurried back to secure the house while I called the police again to update them. The dispatcher confirmed they'd had similar reports in nearby neighborhoods. Groups using Halloween to gather information about homes with children and lack security. We killed the porch lights and closed all the blinds, but I could still hear cars driving slowly past our house. Through a gap in the curtains, I spotted 2 men in hoodies walking up our street, looking at their phones and gesturing at different houses. The police finally arrived around 8:30 p.m. They caught 3 people parked around the corner with notebooks containing detailed information about houses in our neighborhood, which ones had security systems, when parents were distracted, how many children lived there, and most disturbingly, what times kids were likely to be home alone. In their car, officers found lock-picking tools, zip ties, and printed maps of 3 different neighborhoods. The chalk marks, we learned, were their way of tagging houses with accessible children for later. The worst part was discovering how much information our kids had unknowingly given them. Through friendly Halloween conversation, these people had learned our names, our work schedules, what time the kids got home from school, and even which bedroom windows were theirs. That night, after the police left and the kids were finally asleep, Dan and I stayed up installing new security cameras, and changing our rules for Halloween. No more answering the door alone. No more telling strangers anything about our family. No more assuming everyone out on Halloween is there for innocent fun. The following week, we learned that similar groups have been spotted in several nearby towns, using holiday activities as cover to target homes with children. Some had even worn fake church volunteer badges or posed as Halloween event coordinators to seem more legitimate. Now, every Halloween, we have a strict system. The candy bowl stays with the adults. The kids don't answer the door without us. We keep all our security cameras running and share suspicious activity with our neighborhood watch group. Some might call it paranoid, but that night taught us how quickly things could have gone wrong. The scariest part wasn't the potential break-in or the stalking. It was realizing how easily predators could exploit our holiday traditions and our children's innocence. They counted on parents being distracted, on kids being eager to participate, on everyone letting their guard down because it's just Halloween. So if you're planning to let your kids handle trick-or-treaters this year, remember our story. That knock at your door might not be coming from someone interested in candy. Sometimes the real monsters don't wear masks or costumes. They wear hoodies and carry notebooks, waiting for someone's children to innocently tell them everything they need to know. The police caught those 3, but we know there are others out there. Every Halloween, I still hear about similar groups trying the same tactics in different neighborhoods. So we keep our lights on, our cameras rolling, and our kids close, because some lessons you only need to learn once. I used to think getting the perfect Halloween photo for my Instagram was worth any risk. That was before I discovered I wasn't the only one taking pictures that day. The autumn colors were perfect that late October afternoon. As a photography student with a growing social media following, I knew golden hour in Wilson's Woods would give me the moody Halloween content my followers craved. The trails were usually empty on weekdays, which meant I could take my time setting up the perfect shots without tourists ruining the frame. I packed my camera bag with my DSLR, some Halloween props, a vintage mask, some fake cobwebs, and a small jack-o'-lantern, and headed out around 4 p.m. The sun was already starting its descent, casting long shadows through the trees and creating that ethereal glow photographers dream about. The first hour went perfectly. I got some amazing shots of my props arranged against gnarled tree trunks and fallen leaves. It wasn't until I was reviewing the photos on my camera's display that I noticed something odd in the background of one shot, a dark figure standing between 2 distant trees. I looked up quickly, scanning the area, but saw nothing. The woods were silent except for the rustle of leaves in the wind. I zoomed in on the image, but the figure was too blurry to make out clearly. Just a shadow, I told myself. Probably just a hiker passing by. Moving deeper into the woods, I found a perfect spot where the path curved dramatically beneath a canopy of orange and red leaves. I set up my tripod and arranged my props, occasionally checking my phone's location to make sure I wasn't straying too far from the marked trail. That's when I noticed something strange on my phone. The location history showed another device had been following roughly the same path as mine for the past hour, always staying about 100 yards behind me. A chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the October air. I quickly packed up my props and moved to a different area, watching my phone's location history. Sure enough, the other device changed course to match mine. I tried to stay calm. Maybe it was just another photographer with the same idea. But why hadn't I seen them? And why were they maintaining such a consistent distance? Taking out my camera again, I pretended to photograph the landscape while actually using the zoom lens to scan the trees behind me. Through the viewfinder, I caught a glimpse of movement, someone ducking behind a thick oak tree. They were wearing dark clothes and carrying what looked like a camera with a long lens. My hands shook as I reviewed my previous photos, paying close attention to the backgrounds now. In almost every shot, there they were, a dark figure, gradually getting closer. In the first photos, they were just specks in the distance. By the most recent ones, I could make out the shape of a person clearly tracking my movements. I pulled out my phone to call for help, but of course, no signal. Wilson's Woods was notorious for its dead zones. My location tracker was only working because I downloaded the area maps beforehand. Fighting to keep my breathing steady, I started walking quickly toward the parking lot. It was about a mile away, and the sun was sinking faster now, taking the warmth and light with it. The other device on my location history picked up pace too. I heard a twig snap behind me, closer than I expected. Abandoning any pretense of calm, I broke into a run. My camera bag thumped against my hip as I sprinted down the trail, no longer caring about staying quiet. The sound of heavy footsteps behind me sent adrenaline coursing through my body. They were running too now, not bothering to hide anymore. I risked a glance over my shoulder and saw them clearly for the first time. Tall, wearing a dark jacket, with a professional camera setup hanging around their neck. I rounded a bend in the trail and nearly crashed into another hiker, an older man walking his dog. The footsteps behind me suddenly stopped. "Are you okay?" the man asked, taking in my panic state. Between gasps for air, I explained about the person following me. He immediately pulled out his phone, which miraculously had service, and called the park rangers while walking me to the parking lot. The rangers found my stalker's abandoned camera bag about a mile down the trail. Inside were hundreds of printed photos, not just of me that day, but from previous visits to the park. Photos of me setting up shots, checking my phone, walking alone on the trails. They'd been watching me for weeks, using my public Instagram posts to track my favorite photography locations. Even more disturbing were the photos of other young women, dozens of them, all taken in various parks and trails around the area. Like me, most were photographers or influencers who posted their locations online. The police traced the camera's serial number to a man who'd been arrested for stalking charges in another state, but he was never found. I learned later that he'd been using a specialized tracking app to monitor the locations of multiple women through their photo uploads. He knew our patterns, our favorite spots, when we were most likely to be alone. My Halloween photo shoot had just given him another perfect opportunity. The park installed new security cameras after that, and the rangers increased their patrols. I still take photos there sometimes, but never alone and never without sharing my location with trusted friends. I disabled location tracking on my public posts and started varying my photography schedule. Sometimes I think about all those photos in his camera bag, all those women who never knew they were being watched and followed. How many other photographers are out there right now, getting the perfect shot while someone else does the same thing from the shadows? Every October, when the leaves start to turn and photographers head to the woods for those perfect Halloween shots, I share my story as a warning. Check your location settings. Watch your backgrounds. Pay attention to patterns in your photos. Because sometimes when you're taking pictures of the scenery, someone else is taking pictures of you. I still have those photos from that day saved on my computer. In each one, you can track his progress. A dark figure moving closer and closer through the trees while I remained oblivious, focused on getting the perfect shot. It's like a timeline of how quickly a normal day can turn terrifying. The scariest part wasn't the chase or even the discovery of his photo collection. It was realizing how vulnerable we make ourselves in pursuit of the perfect picture. How we announce our locations, share our patterns, and isolate ourselves without thinking about who might be watching. Now, when I see photographers alone in the woods, I always stop to warn them, because the next person hiding behind those trees with a camera might not run away when someone else appears. They might be waiting for the perfect moment to get their own kind of shot, one that doesn't end up on Instagram. These days, I still love Halloween photography, but I've learned that no photo is worth the risk of becoming part of someone else's collection. The real horror isn't in the spooky shots we stage. It's in the frames we don't know we're in. There are two types of crossing guards in my small town, Mr. Jenkins, who's been helping kids cross safely for 12 years, and the person who pretended to be him last Halloween. Only one of them actually worked for the school. As a 6th grade safety patrol member, I was usually first to arrive at the crosswalk in front of Riverside Elementary. That crisp Halloween morning, something felt off the moment I rounded the corner at 7:45 a.m. The crossing guard was already there, sign in hand, wearing what looked like Mr. Jenkins' usual bright yellow vest. But Mr. Jenkins always waited in his blue Civic until exactly 8 a.m., drinking coffee and chatting with us patrol kids before his shift. His car wasn't in its usual spot. "Good morning," I called out, adjusting my orange safety belt. The guard nodded, but didn't respond with his usual cheerful greeting. He kept his face turned slightly away, focused on the empty street. My patrol partner, Kayla, showed up minutes later, shooting me a confused look. "Where's Mr. Jenkins' car?" "Maybe it's in the shop," I whispered back, though something in my gut told me that wasn't it. We watched as the guard paced back and forth, movement stiff and awkward compared to Mr. Jenkins' familiar swagger. The first wave of students started arriving, parents dropping off younger kids, while middle schoolers trudged past with their Halloween costumes stuffed in backpacks. The guard began directing traffic, but his gestures were all wrong. Mr. Jenkins had a specific routine: whistle, then right arm up, left arm directing cars. This person kept switching arms, hesitating between signals. "His vest looks different," Kayla murmured. She was right. The reflective stripes were horizontal instead of diagonal, and the school district logo was missing from the back. A kindergartner named Sophie ran up to the guard, holding out a Halloween card. She made one for Mr. Jenkins every holiday. "I drew you as a ghost this time." The guard took the card without speaking, quickly stuffing it in their pocket. Sophie's face fell. Mr. Jenkins always made a big show of reading cards right away, praising the artwork. My phone buzzed with a text from my mom. "Just got an email from school. Mr. Jenkins called in sick. No sub assigned yet. Be extra careful on crossing duty today." Ice flooded my veins as I looked back at the person directing children across the street. If no substitute had been assigned, who was this? I nudged Kayla and showed her the text. Her eyes widened. "Should we tell Principal Martinez?" Before I could answer, I noticed something even more disturbing. The guard kept touching kids' backpacks as they passed. Quick little pats that looked almost like they were checking for something. Their other hand held a phone, seemingly recording or photographing the steady stream of students. "MS. Martinez won't be in until 8:30, I whispered. "Call the office." Kayla pulled out her phone while I kept watching. The guard was paying special attention to kids who were alone, asking them questions I couldn't quite hear. Several times they pointed students toward the secondary crossing, the one hidden from view by large bushes. My hands shook as I texted my mom back. "Someone's here pretending to be a crossing guard. They're touching kids' bags and redirecting them. Get help." The guard must have noticed us whispering, because they suddenly started walking toward us. Up close, I could see their face clearly for the first time. It was mostly hidden by a surgical mask and dark sunglasses, but the skin around their eyes was much younger than Mr. Jenkins. "Everything okay here?" Their voice was completely wrong. Deeper, with an accent nothing like Mr. Jenkins' Texas drawl. "Fine," I squeaked, desperately hoping Kayla had reached someone in the office. "Just checking the daily schedule." They stared at us for what felt like forever before turning back to the crosswalk. A group of second graders approached, and the guard started directing them toward the secondary crossing. That's when I heard sirens in the distance. The guard's head snapped up, and without a word, they dropped the crossing sign and sprinted toward a white van parked half a block away. 2 police cars rounded the corner, just as the van peeled away from the curb. Teachers poured out of the school, gathering students and doing head counts. Officer Martinez, our school resource officer, ran up to Kayla and me. "Did anyone go to the secondary crossing?" she demanded. We shook our heads. "We kept telling kids to stay on this route," Kayla said. "The guard kept trying to send them that way, but nobody went." The police caught the van 2 miles away. Inside, they found crossing guard equipment stolen from 3 different school districts, along with cameras, zip ties, and detailed maps of elementary school routes. The driver matched the description of a person wanted for attempting to lure children in a neighboring county. We later learned they had been watching our crossing for weeks, learning Mr. Jenkins' routine. They knew he sometimes called in sick during allergy season. They knew the principal arrived late on Wednesdays. They had timed everything perfectly, except for that email alert about no substitute being assigned. The school installed security cameras at all crossings after that. Every crossing guard now has an official ID badge with their photo, and parents get immediate alerts about staff changes. But I still get chills every time I pass that secondary crossing, imagining what might have happened if we hadn't noticed those little details that felt wrong. Mr. Jenkins came back the next day, passing out extra Halloween candy to make up for being sick. Sophie gave him a new card, and he spent 5 minutes praising every crayon stroke, just like always. Everything went back to normal, but something had changed. We learned that sometimes the scariest things aren't the monsters in Halloween costumes. They're the people pretending to be the helpers we trust every day. The ones who study our routines, learn our patterns, and wait for the perfect moment when everyone's guard is down. Now, whenever I see a crossing guard I don't recognize, I check for the new ID badge. I watch how they interact with kids, how they hold their sign, which way they direct traffic. Because sometimes the smallest details, a missing car, a different vest, an unfamiliar gesture, can be the warning signs that save lives. If you ask the kids at Riverside Elementary about the scariest part of Halloween 2023, they won't talk about ghosts or zombies. They'll tell you about the day someone pretended to be Mr. Jenkins and how 2 safety patrol kids trusted their instincts when something felt wrong. Because real heroes don't always wear costumes. Sometimes they wear orange safety belts and make phone calls that stop monsters in their tracks. They say mothers always know when something's wrong with their children. I didn't believe in that sixth sense until I saw it. A shadow moving behind my daughter during our Halloween FaceTime call. She swore she was alone in her dorm room, but mothers know better. Sarah had just started her freshman year at Riverside State, 12 hours away from home. Our nightly FaceTime calls were my way of coping with empty nest syndrome, and she humored me, even though I knew she had better things to do than chat with her mom every evening. That Halloween night, she called right on schedule, eager to show off her costume for the campus party later. Her dorm room was decorated with typical freshman flair, fairy lights, photo collages, and now some dollar store Halloween decorations strung across her desk. "How's the new roommate working out?" I asked, noticing the empty bed behind her. Lauren, her original roommate, had transferred unexpectedly mid-semester. "Still haven't assigned me anyone new." Sarah shrugged, adjusting her witch hat. "I kind of like having the room to myself." That's when I first saw it, a slight movement in the shadows between her closet and desk. Just a quick shift, like someone adjusting their position. My heart skipped a beat, but I kept my voice steady. "How's the party planning going?" Sarah launched into details about the Halloween bash at her friend Emma's off-campus apartment, completely oblivious to what I'd seen. I tried to focus on her words, but my eyes kept darting to that dark corner. There was again definitely movement, more distinct this time. "Honey, is there someone else in your room?" I interrupted. "What?" "No, Mom, I told you, I'm alone." She glanced around briefly. "Why?" I didn't want to frighten her, but maternal instinct was screaming that something wasn't right. "Just thought I saw something move behind you." Sarah rolled her eyes. "It's probably just my fan reflecting on the closet door or something." "You worry too much." Maybe she was right. I was probably just being an overprotective mom, seeing dangers that didn't exist. But over the next few days, I noticed more things during our calls. The shadow became more defined, taking on a human shape. It seemed to be getting closer to Sarah's desk with each call. Thursday night, I watched in horror as what looked like a hand briefly came into frame behind her shoulder before quickly withdrawing. Sarah was focused on telling me about her midterm grades, completely unaware. "Sarah," I said firmly, "turn around right now." She sighed but humored me, swiveling in her chair. "See? Nothing there, Mom. Just my usual mess." But I'd started taking screenshots during our calls. That night, I sent them to my brother Mark, a detective in our hometown. The progression was clear. Something where someone was getting bolder, closer, more visible with each call. "Have you told campus security?" he asked. "And say what? That I see shadows during video calls? They'll think I'm just a crazy helicopter parent. Better than being sorry later," he said. "I can make some calls." The next night, Sarah's call came an hour late. She looked tired, distracted. "Sorry, Mom. Been getting weird noises in my room. Maintenance came today but couldn't find anything in the walls." My blood ran cold. "What kind of noises?" "Just creaks and stuff. Old building, you know? And I keep finding my closet door open even though I always close it." The shadow appeared again while she was talking, larger than ever. This time, I could make out what looked like shoulders and a head, standing directly behind her chair. "Sarah, listen to me very carefully," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "I want you to get up and walk out of your room right now. Don't turn around. Just grab your keys and go to the RA's office." Something in my tone must have finally gotten through to her. She started to stand, but then her eyes went wide as she saw something on her screen. "Mom, what's that behind dash?" The call dropped. My hands shook as I tried to redial. No answer. I called again, straight to voicemail. I was already grabbing my car keys when my phone buzzed. A text from Sarah. "Sorry, phone died. Everything's fine. Calling you back in 5. But something felt wrong about the message. Sarah always used emojis when she texted. This was too plain, too formal. I called campus security immediately, then Mark. By the time they reached her room 15 minutes later, Sarah was gone. But they found something that made my blood run cold. A small hole cut in the back of her closet, leading to a maintenance tunnel. Inside were food wrappers, water bottles, and a tablet set up to mirror Sarah's phone. Someone had been living in that space for weeks, watching her through the hole, intercepting her messages. The search lasted 3 horrifying hours. They finally found her locked in a storage room 2 floors down, unconscious but alive. The attacker had been the maintenance worker who checked her room earlier. He had access to all the building's keys and knew every hidden space in those old walls. Security footage revealed the truth about Lauren's sudden transfer. She hadn't transferred at all. She'd fled after spotting someone watching them through the closet at night. Instead of reporting it, she'd just left, leaving Sarah alone with a predator who'd been plotting for weeks. The police found his hideout in the maintenance tunnels. He had monitors showing feeds from tiny cameras he'd planted in several dorm rooms. But Sarah's room was different. He'd become obsessed with our nightly calls, watching this mother-daughter connection he'd never had. The shadows I'd seen were him emerging further each night, testing how close he could get before being noticed. Sarah took the rest of the semester off, transferring to a college closer to home. She still does nightly video calls with me, but now from the safety of her own apartment, where she lives with 3 roommates. The cameras we installed cover every corner, and she never dismisses that nagging feeling when something seems off. Sometimes I still review those screenshots from our Halloween week calls, watching that shadow grow bolder each night. All the signs were there. The missing roommate, the maintenance visits, the open closet door. We just couldn't put the pieces together until it was almost too late. They never fully explained how he chose his targets or how long he'd been living in those walls. The investigation uncovered similar reports from other colleges. Maintenance workers using their access to stalk students, living in hidden spaces while plotting their attacks. Most victims never knew they were being watched until it was too late. Now, when parents send their kids to college, our story is part of the safety orientation. Check your closets. Report maintenance issues to multiple people. Trust your instincts when something feels wrong. And most importantly, when your mom says she sees something strange during a video call, believe her. Because sometimes those shadows in the background aren't tricks of the light or overactive imaginations. Sometimes they're very real monsters, getting closer and bolder each day, testing how long they can hide in plain sight before making their move. Sarah's doing better now, but she never decorates for Halloween anymore. She says she's had enough real-life scares to last a lifetime. And those nightly video calls? We still have them, but now we both check the backgrounds carefully, watching for any movement in the shadows. Because once you've seen something lurking there, you never stop looking.